Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Sounds good. Awesome. Okay. Yes. So the title of this talk when I submit it was Building Modular Web Applications, : How to Build a Good Component. And then it was weird because I've had a bunch of talks going on. I've been like trying to keep on top of everything. And I came back to this talk and I was like, okay, what did I submit for this thing? Probably something web components. And I saw this title. And I had like this really visceral reaction to this title because it's just so long. Like, it's actually really lengthy. And I had the same visceral reaction to this title that I've had to something like the code I've been writing. So today we're going to talk about something that I'm really bad at, and I'm hoping that by talking about it, like maybe there'll be some people that can relate and also want to sort of be more concise in the way that they organize the structure of their project or the way that they do their programming. And I'd like us to be more elegant as developers. So I thought about things a lot, and I was like, okay, well, now I really feel like I want to reframe this a little bit. And so now this talk is called Only What You Need. And that's me on Twitter. I'm sorry, I don't have the slide deck up yet. It will come afterwards. If you like red pandas and you like programming, then you should follow me on Twitter. There's a lot of the former rather than the latter sometimes, so just you got to be really panda friendly. So I'm from Vancouver. Vancouver, Canada, as opposed to Vancouver, Washington, because I know there's like one guy here from Vancouver, Washington. Maybe more than one. And for the last few years, I worked at a company called Steam Clock Software, where I wrote apps across a variety of platforms. So I did native iOS, I did native Java, or Android rather. I did PhoneGap. I actually worked on my own Objective-C JavaScript bridge. Spoiler, don't do it, just use PhoneGap. And of course, also web apps, both front end and back end. Before I left, I did some Node stuff. And now I actually work at Mozilla, and I work on Firefox OS. So I get to like keep the best parts of mobile and like be all web all the time, and that's pretty awesome. So let's talk about brains. Who here has a brain? Everybody, please put up your hand. Everybody, please put it up. Oh my gosh. So they're in our heads, and they're largely what makes us capable of programming. I mean, I guess you can argue that your appendages and kinematics, that's also really important. But today we're going to talk about brains, your brains. And we're going to talk a little bit about the things that go into what happens when you program. So when you're programming and you're working on a project, you generally have your cognition engaged. And your cognition, the best way to put it really is sort of like the part of your brain that deals with executive function and decision making and reasoning. The brain meets in the front of your head. The forebrain is generally where a lot of your executive function lives. And so that's a very important factor that goes into programming because we need to be able to think critically and make good decisions. The other thing is working memory. And if we were to make a very casual metaphor between computers and people, working memory is kind of like your RAM. Working memory is the stuff that you keep in like kind of, how to put it colloquially, the stuff that you kind of keep on your mind when you're working on something. So if you're working on like a particular controller in your project, you're probably thinking about like, okay, this controller talks to this model, there's a view somewhere else in there, and you think about the relationship between those things, and while you're working on that particular feature, your mental model is kept in your working memory. And working memory is fairly limited. People who are programmers are fairly well practiced at it, but I mean, I think on average, they've done some research to do with like digit memorization. And humans, even very practiced humans, tend to max out at strings of digits that are, some are like 8 or 9. I think it's 7 on average that people can sort of remember at once, and then like 8 or 9 is sort of a fuzzy area. So we sort of start seeing that these resources we have as human beings with our brains are quite limited. Which brings me to attention. Who's ever been in the zone, right? Like you want, everybody I hope. You know, the zone is when you're programming something and you want to like block out all distractions and you just really want to take your attention and turn it to this focused little nugget on the problem at hand. Because we all know that attention is a very divisible resource. We can be driving and talking on the phone, which, by the way, I do not recommend at all. You can be driving and trying to talk on the phone, or you can be like kind of half coding something in HTML and like talking to your boss over there, and you can divide your attention. So attention is a very interesting resource because you can divide it in such a way. And I would also argue that working memory is sort of the same. Working memory and attention have a very close relationship because working with your working memory in that mental model, when you can give it the most attention, you'll have the best results. So we've talked a little bit about cognition and what that is. We've talked a little bit about working memory. And we've talked a little bit about attention. And I like to describe the sum of these three things, aggregate at any given point, as your cognitive load. And programming is hard. right? Like we as programmers have to keep in our working memory very complicated mental models. And who's ever been like on a project and been like the only person who knows everything about that project? Yeah, I know, right? It's really overwhelming, and you end up in this really tenuous balance of like, okay, well, like I'm the gatekeeper, I can handle the cognitive load, but then you end up with this really hard problem of like, well, I don't just want to be that person. Like, I probably need some help. This company needs more than one person on this project. How do I take some of this big mental model and transmit the information to someone else so it's not overwhelm their cognitive load? If you're a nice programmer, you think about that. Other people, they don't. I've met them. So cognitive load is the sum of these three things. And I'd like us to be nicer to our brains, actually. I think that reduced cognitive load means happier developers. And so what we're going to talk about today is we are going to talk about web components, but we're going to talk about a lot about what a modular or what a module or component is, what the relationship between like modules and components are, and then like what even does this term web components mean. And I'm going to posit some ideas that will allow us to create smaller, discrete modules, which when we're working with them individually will allow us to have less in our mental models. The idea is that the organization and the structure of the project makes it easier for you to deal with. So brains are good at chunking at information. Brains are excellent at pattern recognition, and they're excellent at chunking information, but only little chunks and not too many at a time. Right now, like I actually just started Mozilla a short while ago, and in their docs they have this Mozilla fire hose, where like they actually just upfront tell you that you're going to be bombarded with tons of information. Oh my gosh, it's totally overwhelming. So I like to think that information architecture, if you guys don't have somebody at your firm that does information architecture, like you definitely want to hire them. And also as developers, there are things that we can do to structure our projects so that things end up a little bit easier. So let's write these programs that are easier to think about. And I mean, why would we want to do this? I already explained to you that we can reduce cognitive load. Let's put on our thinking beard for a moment here. And the first thing is that it's easier to spool up new devs on your project, right? I mean, if you've got a very discrete set of components that are very easy and like have documentation with each particular feature, and you have like a good organization of your project, it's easier to spool up new devs. You don't have to be answering as many questions. It's easier for them to get on board with the mental model. Because as we become more experienced programmers, often one of the things that I do, and I notice that other developers do, is when new programmers come on a project, those that don't have as much experience as us, we make a lot of assumptions about how much they can handle right away and what we think they should be able to do. But the thing is, we were at the same point at those programs at one point. We don't remember it. A lot of us don't. And we need to be a little bit more compassionate to that situation. So in this particular situation, I'd argue that being a bit more modular with your program design is going to mean that it's easier to spool up new devs on your project. And then by having modular, discrete components that you can sort of interchange like Legos, it's easier to maintain and refactor something that's small rather than like one big monolithic file that has like weird interdependencies between functions that are unclear because it's uncommented, and having like a PTSD moment here. And so how do we do this? And so what I want to talk about now is a little bit of modules versus components, because I've noticed in web development that we often have like a terminology problem, right? And we're going to talk about HTML5 again in a moment, because that one has been the most problematic. When I'm talking about modules, I'm thinking of a module as though it represents like a major feature or a subset of features that encompasses a major feature. So for example, like I might have a users module that deals with like my login, it deals with like my password recovery, it deals with the user's, like the user's profile page and being able to perform operations on the data for that user. And I might bundle a module that's called users, but within that module, I might have particular folders structured for things like login. Maybe there's one for logout. I feel like that's pretty simple, but there might be. Maybe there's some tasks you need to do there for recovering password. And so I would actually structure my module that way. And so I think that the sort of analogous thing in jQuery is probably plugins, really, because you can have a plugin that can do a lot of different things. And so I think that plugins and the term module are sort of analogous. I come from a background where I did program PHP for a number of years. Please don't hurt me. And I worked with Drupal. And I actually really liked the module system in Drupal because it sort of had this really similar pattern, and that to me made a lot more sense than just dumping everything in a directory named for a page. Like, there have been a lot of web applications I've worked on where there'll be like a admin page, like admin folder, and then I go into that folder and it's just like a mess of files that are totally unorganized, and I have to like weed through them to figure out how the bits all fit together. So really, I would say that there's supposed to be a strike through there. I hope you can see it. I would really say that in this situation, plugins and modules are sort of analogous if you think about jQuery plugins. So then what's a component? So to me, I think a component is a very small piece of software that is very loosely coupled and easy to swap out or interchange with other components if you need to. So in the case of like a jQuery plugin, I would consider a component in that case to be like one function that does one thing really well. A component should be something that is small and does one thing really well. So you can even say, like, this gets a little bit fuzzy, of course, we can even say that some plugins and some modules are themselves components. They do one thing really well, or one set of things really well. You plug them into your application, you've got your users module or your users plugin. So that's just a little bit, to do with terminology. So the first thing I can give you as advice about writing modules and components and trying to discretize things is to write tidy components. When I mention components and I say that I really think that they should do one thing well, I think that things should be very, very small and that actually you should have all of the things for that component in one place, in one folder, so that they're all together. This is taken from the Mozilla Xtags repository. And Xtags is a web components sort of polyfill, polylib, whatever. Xtags is a project that's basically trying to implement components and web components using the new technologies like Shadow DOM and HTML templating, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And the one thing I really like about Xtags and the way that they do things in their repository is that you can see that for a given component, all the bare bones CSS is there, the JavaScript is there, and the template file for creating this slide box demo is also there. There are some projects that will take these assets and throw them all in like a public folder somewhere and won't be terribly organized. I like this model where everything for one particular tiny feature or one component is all kept together. Because I can imagine myself being new on a project and I want to know how Slidebox works. If I just go in there and just find the JavaScript, but the styles are off somewhere else, I don't know. I mean, you got to do a little bit of hunting. And for somebody who's old on the project, sure, maybe that's not a big deal. But I don't know. We want to be able to spool up new devs quickly. As I said, I think that's part of the asset here. And as I mentioned, writing small components. Your component should do one thing really well. And this is a quote from James Halliday. He's also a gentleman who goes by Substack. He's a fairly prolific Node module publisher. And he gave a talk called Code Collage at JSConf that was all about writing very small programs. And I realized that he and I had very similar philosophies on writing software. And he said the best things that can be said about software is that it is too small. And then actually I saw a quote on Twitter just the other day that I also like. That's sort of like a corollary to this. I think it was like D. Shaw that said it. He said like, the most efficient code that you'll write is the code that you didn't write. Like really there's sort of like this overarching theme of minimalism, of really making sure that your component only does what it needs to. And we're talking about modules, and then the word modular comes up, right? Because the word modular means that things are discrete and can be usually interchanged and fairly encapsulated, which we'll also talk about in a moment. But being able to write modular components means that you write components that if they need to talk with other components or other modules in your program, they are written with an interface that is simple to talk to and loosely coupled so that they can be kind of like Lego, basically. One of the big important things about making things modular is that ideally they can be reused. If you create things that have simple interfaces and are loosely coupled, ideally you can reuse them later and scaffold and bootstrap other projects with them. And so just to summarize before we go on, the best practices, I think, for writing modules and components and getting into this mindset are really that they should do one thing really well. They should have simple interfaces to communicate but remain loosely coupled. They are reusable as much as possible, so modular. And ideally they are encapsulated. And that last one is actually what we're going to talk about a little bit next. So I think that you should also be writing encapsulated components. Who here is familiar with encapsulation? The idea, sort of? Okay, I'll explain it. I didn't bring my robots GIF that I like for this one. But so in encapsulation is when you have a piece of software that has a boundary so that the code around it can't necessarily tinker with the bits inside. So for example, up until recently, up until like the advent of web components, one of the only ways to do this in the front end was with iframes. And who doesn't love iframes, right? Yeah, I know. Lots of overhead for iframes. They're not terribly flexible. There is a new attribute for iframes that's been proposed and actually I think is behind a flag in Chrome, which is now blank. And it's called iframes seamless. And you can get iframes to behave like very much like an inline element. And you can actually do some stuff with them now where you can have like styles from your cascade penetrate the iframe. That is like almost more experimental than some of the web component stuff out there, but it does exist. I'm not sure if that iframe seamless has the same problems as the existing iframes do, like the overhead and some of that stuff. I'm willing to bet that it does. So up until recently, we only had iframes for front-end encapsulation, but a better answer to that is actually web components. And now that brings us back to this terminology problem again, right? So we've got modules, which we sort of made analogous to plugins in a sense. We talked about components, which are very discrete pieces of software that do one thing well, and ideally we would want them to be encapsulated so they kind of live in their own little place, and we don't have namespace collisions and other stuff like that in our front-end code. But what about web components? Who here has heard about web components or watched a talk on them already? Okay, so some people. We're going to go over them a little bit cursory. So what I want to mention right now is that some really excellent resources for looking at web components and watching videos on them are html5rocks.com has an excellent section that will go through like all the stuff on Shadow DOM and how to use components. And also Eric Biedelman's Google I/O presentation on web components was also really fantastic. In fact, I think he did a really good job of summarizing sort of the state of things because these are very new technologies, and so the specifications have been changing. I gave a talk on web components last year, and like people are like, "Oh, I love your talk," and I'm like, "Oh, don't watch it. It's all outdated now." You know, like that's how fast this stuff moves. So anyway, web components. How do those relate to these other terms, modules and components? Well, web components is the new HTML5. I mean, how many people went through that point where people were like, "Oh, what's HTML5?" You know, is it just HTML, like version 5? No, it didn't end up being used that way at all. HTML5 came to mean like rich applications with new DOM APIs that have JavaScript, CSS3, and then of course, you know, more advanced HTML. And so HTML5 came to be like a little hat or umbrella term for a host of technologies. And the term web components is very much the same way. It's an umbrella term. Web components refers to a set of about 4 technologies that you can use to create better components because these technologies will provide encapsulation in the front end, which is something that we've really been needing a good solution to for a while. So the 4 technologies, the first one is actually called Shadow DOM. And Shadow DOM, there are a few talks I saw that already talked about Shadow DOM and how you can like turn on a flag in Chrome to show Shadow DOM. And if you inspect things like the video element or certain input fields, you'll notice in the web inspector that you can sort of expand like, you know, a little bit more into the tree, and they'll show you these shadow roots. And this is a technology that browser vendors have been using for some time in order to do exactly what we want to do, and that's create these encapsulation boundaries so that you don't write code that like interferes with the styling of the HTML5 video controls. Spoiler, there's totally WebKit stuff to do that, but the original implementation idea, I think, was to make it so that us web developers didn't mess up what the browser vendors had done. So Shadow DOM, I've put create shadow root there as a function. The important thing to think about with Shadow DOM is it's basically like taking a tiny document fragment and having it live inside of another element. So like you might have a div, and you can take like this tiny DOM instance and kind of like just put it in there. And if it sounds weird, it is kind of weird, but come talk to me afterwards, since we're going to go over this just a little quick. Come talk to me afterwards. I love talking about this stuff, and we can totally like do a demo, or I'll explain it. But the cool thing about Shadow DOM is it's the glue. Shadow DOM is what provides the DOM and style encapsulation boundaries for these technologies. And so you can actually create a Shadow DOM in an element imperatively by using JavaScript, or you can use HTML templates. And I'm really excited about HTML templates because it means that people are going to be able to take care, or pardon me, everybody is going to be able to do things with Shadow DOM even if they don't use with JavaScript as their primary language every day. And in particular, I'm thinking about designers who are very comfortable writing markup in CSS. Maybe they know a little bit of light JavaScript. Probably if they're here, they use jQuery. That's awesome. But template is very interesting because when you use the template tag, it has the implicit inclusion of Shadow DOM. When you use a template and you instantiate it, it will create a Shadow DOM boundary for you. And so these templates, when they're parsed by the browser, they're parsed but not rendered, and then you can actually grab them later and clone them. So essentially, we've got client-side templating being provided by these DOM APIs, which I think is really, really cool. The next thing is custom elements. my X unicorn element doesn't actually exist. Don't go look on GitHub. And this is the multi-tool that begets other tools. This allows you to declare your own HTML elements or extend existing ones. And this is, like I say, a whole huge topic. But again, when you're creating custom elements, you use some of Shadow DOM. Generally, your custom element will have its own template, like one of these from the last slide. And when you create your custom element, you specify a template. And you also specify some JavaScript that gives behavior to the widget or thing that you're building, your custom element. So imagine that you could do an x-date picker, and all of your date picker logic and all of the minimal styles and all of the HTML like structure and markup is all contained in a file somewhere, and you just load that. Which brings me to the last one, which is HTML imports. So this markup here should look fairly similar for including things like style sheets and whatnot. These are HTML imports, and basically this is how you would load something that was a custom element or a custom template externally. You would throw that in there. It does create an HTTP request. The good news is you can actually concatenate your templates and stuff like that. So if you're worried about performance overhead of multiple HTTP requests, that's something that we're trying to address. So yeah, basically this is the loader. It does what's on the tin. So yeah, I think that you guys should be trying to write encapsulated components, but when the tech gets there. People keep asking me, and actually I participated on like a jQuery thread where people were like, oh, web component, Shadow DOM, this is really great. Should we put this in jQuery? And my answer was no. Like, actually no, not until the specification has moved along a lot more. There are two libraries, one that I mentioned, Xtags, and Polymer, which was previously called ToolKitchen, I suppose. But Polymer and Xtags are the most advanced libraries out there if you want to experiment with these technologies. Polymer in particular, you're able to use their polyfill for these technologies without necessarily buying into, they've got like a whole sort of like a bit of infrastructure for doing components. And actually Xtags, the Mozilla project, I was just looking in the repo the other day, they actually pull in Polymer's polyfills because they are the most advanced. So write encapsulated components when you can. I admit that it's not quite there yet. Like, it's not something I do in my production code, but I really want you guys to be aware of this stuff because I think it's immensely powerful. And like, I've been joking that like, yeah, 2013, the year of web components, but it really has been. Like, it's taken off. It's really popular. And all the major browser vendors, I think, are sort of getting on board with it. So what about devs that consume your code, right? We've talked about people like maybe working at your company that get on board, and we've talked a little bit about like ourselves and maintaining a mental model. But like, one of the things that always bugged me about jQuery when I, like this is years ago, when I didn't know that there was like a command line tool to allow me to do a custom build of jQuery. And then I found this command line tool, and like for someone like for me, like 3 to 5 years ago, it wasn't super accessible. Like I wasn't super into it. I understand that with jQuery 2, there's going to be like a lot of custom build options. I think that's great, and so that's exactly what I'm leading to. If you're somebody who writes code that you want other people to consume, even if it's just a jQuery plugin, please make it as modular as possible so that people can a la carte grab the things they want for your plugin. If you're making like a slideshow, it has 20 different effects, I might only want 2 of those effects. And I don't want to have to go in your code and figure out which functions and edit your file kind of thing to get through that. I just want the things that I want so I can go and get my development done, right? Like, we're all under time constraints as developers. So enter Picnic. Picnic is a tool and simple API. There we go. If you go to picinit.cc, Picnic is a tool that my friend Alex from the Pastry Box is working on. It's kind of funny, actually, because like I live with a programmer. We're like walking down the street one day, and I was like, it would be really cool if we could spend some time and build this thing that allowed us to do like modular jQuery plugins, and like just so that somebody could take their library, come to this website with a simple API, and then they could create their own custom builder for their library. And then really funny, I'm like, I'm writing for this thing called the Pastry Box, and I'm super late on my article, and I'm thinking that Alex is totally going to shit on me for this. And he's all like, oh, thanks for the article. By the way, I wrote this thing. I'm like, oh my God, did we just have like a psychic moment? Like, this is about as close to a psychic moment, I think, as I've ever had, because I think Picnic is really great, and we're gonna look at a little bit about how Picnic works. So I have up here, I have, if you go to the github.io one, with the jQuery Picnic example, that will take you to the web form that actually builds a custom build of my tiny demo plugin. And the latter one there is actually just the code example. But I'm gonna pull that up on the monitor in just a moment here. Oh yeah, that's a spoiler. Okay, so let's see here. All right. So what we're looking at right here, can everybody see that okay? I can like make it a bit bigger. So I've got this thing called my jQuery plugin.js, and this is a form that I'm hosting, obviously, on GitHub. And it allows me to pick what I need. So I'm going to pick maybe some function, some other function, and I'm going to build it. And it creates a custom build of some file that's somewhere. Okay, well, where is that file? Let's go over to Sublime. I don't have oh, no, yes, I do. OK, so the website that we were just looking at is right up here. And it's basically your standard HTML document. The special things to note in it are this form that's named picnic. And right here, we've got an action that sends some information to this API endpoint. And if you go to the picnic documentation, there's actually a very simple API there that will show you all the arguments you can pass on this URL string to do things like minify. That's all I can think of, but there's more than minify. And you include a few other things like your username, the name of the project, and also like where to find the assets. Where to find the assets on GitHub. And then you create like a form so that people can build your plugin. The other thing that you include is this picnic.json, so that when you actually contact the Picnic service, you can specify what version it is, and you can specify where the assets are. And then this one particular property called bits is where you specify the components of your plugin. So let's actually take a look at my plugin and see how that works. So if we open up my jQuery plugin here, and we look at line 5, you'll see that I've got a special comment here with some curly braces that says picnic and some function. And then we've got a closing picnic tag right here in a comment. And then we've got it again for some other function. And so basically what you do with your jQuery plugin is you provide some metadata about which parts are sort of like discrete components that people could use in this builder to create a custom version of your plugin a la carte. And this tool then gives every jQuery plugin builder the ability to create very modular and very like discrete components of their plugin, and then allows people to customize. There are other libraries that do this really well, like ender.js, which calls itself like a non-library, but allows you to take components of technologies and sort of build your own JavaScript library. If you have ever used Lodash, which I think is sort of like an underscore alternative, Lodash has a really great custom builder. And as I understand, I think jQuery 2.0 is either has that already or is going to have that pretty shortly. Because I don't know, as a developer, I really don't want a lot of extra stuff. I mean, when I'm dealing with building mobile applications or a responsive site, and I know that I may be shipping that site all over the world, and I've got people in countries like places in South America where the network connectivity over their mobile devices is really not often up to par like it is in North America. Even there's places in North America where I go and I'm like, how do I only have 2 bars here? But the idea is that the less is better, because data is expensive. I mean, I'm from Canada, and like roaming here, not so great. So less is definitely more when it comes to on-page load, when it comes to whatever you're keeping in memory for your mobile application, and whatever you're delivering to people over a network, really. So I really, really like this way to be able to do like your own custom sort of component builder, and I implore you to sort of give it a try. It's actually very, very simple. The code is up on my GitHub with this basic sort of like it's not really a real plugin. It doesn't do anything exciting. But to go take a look at it and try it with your plugins, and like give us feedback and let us know if this tool has been useful for you. All right, I guess we could show and there's also a minify option. So if I build it, then I should get a minified version back. Yep, there we go. Fantastic. So that is Picnic. And I've got a little bit of time left, so we're going to play a game called Who's the Programmer? Because I work at Mozilla, and of course, anytime I go somewhere now, they're like, hey, do you want to give out some stuff? And I'm like, yeah, I do want to give out some stuff. That could be really cool. But I want to like have fun with it. I just want to like hand out T-shirts or whatever. So I've got this bag of Mozilla stuff here, and there's, I think, 5 or 6 T-shirts in here. I promise you there's at least 1 small, and there's like 2 or 3 mediums and several larges. So whoever gets the bag is free to disseminate the awesome rocket ship shirts amongst their friends. There's some Firefox lanyards in here. There's a pretty sweet bag, although I'm not really sure it competes with those awesome jQuery backpacks, honestly. Those are pretty sweet. So we're going to play a game called Who's the Programmer? And I need 2 volunteers from the audience, which I'm going to pick arbitrarily. Put up your hands. Come on, do it. OK, you right there. Who else? Nobody wants to play this game. OK, I got one over there. OK, you guys come up here. So yeah, thank you. Let's have some applause for the people who are brave. I know it's the end of the second day, and you guys are all super tired. So I was hoping to liven things up, but everybody's like, no. All right. Yeah. Just come on up here. And, oh, wait, there's 3 of you. I only needed 2 of you. Well, we can try and play with 3, but like, okay. Okay, so you guys come up here. So, gladiatorial combat, okay. Okay, so time for a game called Who's the Programmer? You probably want to be able to look at my screen because like turning around is kind of awkward. So I'm going to put up pictures of 2 people, and you've got to tell me which one is the programmer. Bonus points if you can actually name who the programmer is. And whoever gets the best out of 3 is going to take home this sweet bag of Mozilla swag. All right, so you guys ready for round 1?
Okay. Ready as I'll ever be.
Okay.
Right.
The right.
The right. Oh, he said it first, but who is it?
Brendan Ike.
Brendan Reich. Okay, definitely correct. The one on the right is Brendan Ike. The other one is Brendan Fraser. Not a programmer. I mean, he might. I just don't know. Okay, so 1 point to, I'm sorry, what's your name?
Tom.
1 point to Tom, and we've got, you just have E on your tag. I'm going to call you E. Your name is, oh, really?
Yep, they named me a letter.
Wow, cool. That's pretty awesome. Okay, so round 2. Who's the programmer? Okay, well, you said left first. What do you think?
It's definitely left.
Definitely left. Okay, do you know who the guy on the right is?
Skrillex,
Yeah,
Or
Skrillex.
has the haircut.
Has the haircut for Skrillex, but yes, and on the left is John Russig. So you were quickest again, so 2 points to you. And now we've got one more.
Right.
Oh, you said right? Okay.
I think right.
You think right too? Okay. Yes, it's definitely the right. That's Scott Hanselman, who looks remarkably like Chris O'Dowd from the IT crowd. So you, sir, are the. Can we get a round of applause for our fantastic knowledge of programmers? And there you go, bag of Mozilla swag. And so this has been Only What You Need by me, Angelina Fabbro. Please come and talk to me about web components and about these software design ideas because I'm actually very friendly and I like to talk to you. So that's about it. I got like 8 whole minutes. What do you guys want to do?
Answer questions.
Oh, shit, yeah. Okay, questions. Let's do questions. Who's got questions? Nobody. Okay, right over there. Yes. Yeah, no, I do have something to say about that, actually. Yeah, sorry, what's that? Oh, sorry. So the question was like discoverability of components. Like, if you're trying to follow web components or like this idea of designing modular software, like who's doing it, where are examples that you can find. This ethos or programming sort of philosophy has become fairly popular. I mean, you've got like, I would consider like most things on NPM to be like modules, and like searching there counts as modules and components. Searching the xtags registry, you will find things that are definitely components and also prepped to be ready for when Shadow DOM kind of is more of a thing. And like I say, xtags, those examples are now using the polymer polyfills. There's been like a bit of like a rift almost. Like I know that TJ Hollowaychuk started components.io, I think sort of like come away from some of the massive monolith modules in Node and try and make things more discrete in this way. But then we've also got other package managers like Bower, and like there's a number of competing like package management and like component registries. So to answer, like I don't really have a good answer for your question, but I would say keep your eye on component.io, keep your eye on xtags registry, and keep your eye on, I guess, Bower, especially since like we're at a front end kind of conference. So Bower has become quite a popular thing. Any other questions? Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about Firefox OS's support for xtags?
Oh yeah, I can definitely talk about that. So with Firefox OS, it's an open web operating system for mobile phones, and the target markets are South America and Eastern Europe for launch. But the Geeks phones are actually making their way around, and we've got a developer program. If you're a developer that has like some follow through and you really want to make apps and you want to get them in the marketplace, you should come talk to me about your app idea. In any case, we've been encouraging people, and actually part of like our best practices and design patterns for making apps for Firefox OS are actually using xtags. Just because they are, like I say, they're a module. They're easy to sort of swap in and out. When you do things this way and organize one idea all in one folder, kind of, and the component does one thing well, it's really easy to get going and spool up really quickly, especially in the case of X tags. I mean, like, you've got a whole component registry there. You can go and grab, like, OK, I need a slide box. OK, I need a date picker widget, and just sort of make your app a la carte that way. So yeah, building apps with Firefox OS, we've got a very strong emphasis on using X tags. Anybody else? Everybody's just hypnotized by the animation. That's it. We're good? All right. Well, thanks for having me, everyone. Woo!